Hello. Today I'd like to share some thoughts on closing Guantanamo Bay and what to do with the prisoners there, and also on Obama's Supreme Court nominee, Sonia Sotomayor. First, Guantanamo Bay. This past Friday I watched Real Time with Bill Maher, a show that I highly enjoy, and they talked about Guantanamo Bay, which inspired some of my own ideas. The first thing that people ought to keep in mind is that these are prisoners. They don't have their guns, they don't have their suicide bombs. For the most part, they're fairly harmless, and as was suggested on Real Time on Friday night, it's highly doubtful that they have the skills and intellect of James Bond, so it's highly unlikely they're going to break out and cause havoc to the countryside. Another thing to keep in mind is that no one breaks out of these highest security federal prisons, and even if a prisoner did, what are they going to do? Be airlifted out of the area by Al-Qaeda, or go grab the nuke hidden under the mattress in the nearest sleeper cell? Every lawmaker seems to object to having the prisoners relocated to prisons in their own districts, the not in my backyard syndrome, or NIMBY syndrome. The problem with that in my mind is that unless they're building special new prisons just to fill with these supposed terrorists, there's already a prison in your backyard filled with dangerous and violent people. I highly doubt that one more person locked up in there is going to substantially change the property value or the threat potential of that prison. The final thing I think people should keep in mind is that unless these Guantanamo prisoners are kept under constant supervision and complete isolation, incidentally making them all the more harmless, they'll probably be killed by other inmates in due time. And now some thoughts on Sonia Sotomayor. A recent headline caught my eye, and I didn't even read the article, but it was Sotomayor's objectivity called into question. And that calls into question this whole objectivity debate about having a Latino or any other minority on the Supreme Court. This of course stems from her repeated comments about the fact that a wise Latina with the richness of her experience would probably reach a better conclusion than a white man. Now, I don't know why she doesn't qualify this more specifically, but I believe what she means is that a Latina would make a better decision regarding another Latina or Latina issues than a white man who isn't familiar with or not exposed to those issues. This all has to do more with the general idea of objectivity and subjectivity on the Supreme Court. And it seems to me that if all the Supreme Court justices were all 100% objective on every decision, they would always reach unanimous decisions because there could only be one right answer. However, this is fundamentally impossible to begin with because the Constitution never outlined how to deal with every scenario under the sun. It leaves much to interpretation. Sotomayor's own point has been that it is impossible for anyone to divorce themselves completely from their own experiences because this is in large part what defines our thought process, and that our experiences should not be completely divorced from our thought process because that is what brings a balanced interpretation inclusive of the variety involved in our nation to a ruling. So the question is, why is Sotomayor's subjectivity an issue when, until recently, every decision was based on the subjective judgment of straight white men? Keep in mind, these are the white men who once maintained that women were not intelligent enough or rational enough to vote. These were the white men who ruled that blacks should remain segregated while receiving similar but inferior services to whites. Clearly these white men were reaching objective conclusions. Considering the Supreme Court's legacy, I would say some minority subjectivity, asserting the rights of those less represented, is in order. Now, I understand that judges are not chosen to represent a district or population. They are not selected to express the people's will or exercise their own. They cannot be lobbied. They represent the Constitution, which must be applied to all with a degree of dispassion. However, I believe we are too diverse a nation to exclude the perspective of minorities from the interpretation of a document that must speak to every nuance of this nation's residents. Without that, the Constitution, this nation, and all of its residents are viewed from too narrow a perspective for there to be anything that approaches objectivity. In any event, I think the Republicans are further screwing themselves by trying to make arguments against Sotomayor, because the fact of the matter is that her rulings and her long time on the court shows no pattern in her decision making. So it's kind of hard to say that she's an activist judge or a biased judge or anything of the nature.